My name is Naomi Calloway. I am 34 years old. I am a cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. And on a Tuesday evening in February, I was standing at the scrub sink on the fourth floor of the cardiac unit when my pager went off. 60-year-old male, STEMI presentation, ETA 4 minutes, transfer from Naperville Fire Station 3. I didn't think anything about Naperville. There are close to 150,000 people in Naperville. I pulled on my gloves. I walked to the bay. I was in the mode I'd spent 8 years learning how to enter. That particular stillness that lives just below the surface of urgency, where your hands know what to do before your mind has finished the sentence. The paramedic came through the double doors at 6:46, reading from the tablet, the gurney wheels loud on the linoleum, into the overhead lights catching the silver in the patient's hair, and I looked at my father's face. He looked at mine. He said my name. Not doctor. Not, excuse me. He said Naomi, the way you say someone's name when you didn't expect the ground to be where it is when you step on it. Surprised. Unsteady. The syllables coming out before the thought had fully formed. I said, Mr. Calloway, you're at Northwestern Memorial. We're going to take care of you. 3 months before that night, my parents had thrown my father's 60th birthday party and did not tell me it was happening. This is that story. But it doesn't begin in that hospital. It begins in Naperville, in a beige carpeted house on Clearwater Lane, where I grew up as the kind of daughter my family never quite figured out what to do with. Before we get into this, please like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you, and drop your location and the time it is there right now in the comments. I want to know where in the world you are while you're hearing this. My father is Robert Calloway. Bobby, to the people who grew up with him in Rockford. He built custom homes for 30 years. Good ones, quality ones, the kind that have crown molding and radiant floor heating and garages that fit 2.5 cars. He is a man who understands structure, who can walk a job site and tell you in 4 minutes exactly where the stress is distributed and where the weaknesses live. He never turned that eye on himself or on us. My mother is Patricia Calloway. She taught 3rd grade at Meadowbrook Elementary in Naperville for 22 years. She remembered every student's birthday. She organized the classroom holiday parties with laminated sign-up sheets. She was the teacher parents requested by name, the one the principal put in the welcome brochure. If you met her at a school function or a neighborhood cookout or the produce section of the Jewel on Route 59, you would walk away thinking she was one of the warmest people you'd ever encountered. She is not a cruel woman. I want to say that plainly. She is a woman who loved both of her daughters and was simply, completely blind to the fact that she loved them differently. My sister Claire is 37. 3 years older than me. She is blonde where I am dark, quick to laugh where I am measured, the kind of person who fills a room without trying. Growing up, Claire was the event. She was the cheerleader and the homecoming court, and the girl the teachers called a delight on every report card. She got her driver's license at 16, and my father put a red bow on the roof of a silver Honda Civic and stood in the driveway filming it on his phone. I was 13 years old, standing at the front window in my socks, watching. I don't remember anyone explaining why that was the right thing to do. It just was. Claire was the kind of daughter who got Civics with red bows. I was the kind of daughter who got told to go back inside because it was cold. I need to say something about Claire before I go further, because I want this to be honest and not cheap. I don't hate my sister. I have thought about this with the same precision I bring to everything, and I've arrived at that conclusion cleanly. She didn't build the system. She was a child inside it, the same as me. She was handed things, attention, cheerleading uniforms, a DePaul University education paid for in full, a wedding dress that cost $4,800, and a reception at Gaslamp Chicago for which my parents wrote a check for $45,000. And she accepted them the way people accept gifts when they're young, which is without asking what the gift cost the person who didn't receive one. But here is the thing about the system: it doesn't need a villain to be destructive. It just needs to run long enough. I was accepted to the University of Illinois at Chicago in the spring of my senior year of high school. I got a 3.94 GPA and a 1,390 on the SAT, and I wanted to be a doctor. Had wanted to be a doctor since I was 11 years old and sat in a waiting room at Edward Hospital in Naperville while my grandfather was in surgery, and watched a cardiologist in blue scrubs walk out to talk to my grandmother. And the look on my grandmother's face went from terrified to something else, something softer, and I understood that the person who had done that was the person in the blue scrubs. I decided that afternoon. I never changed my mind. My parents contributed $8,000 toward my first year at UIC. They called this generous. They pointed to it later, more than once, as evidence of their support. I took out $47,000 in federal and private student loans over 4 years. By the time I graduated with a degree in biochemistry and a 3.88 GPA, and I was $47,000 in debt and had been home for a combined total of 14 days in 4 years, because every break was a chance to pick up extra shifts at the hospital job I'd gotten as a patient transporter in my sophomore year. My parents did not come to my graduation. My mother had a school district retirement dinner she was committed to. My father said the drive into the city on a Friday was too much. I walked across the stage at the UIC pavilion alone, in a rented gown, with my supervisor from the transport department. A 58-year-old man named Gerald, who had driven in from Berwyn because he thought everyone deserved someone in the audience, sitting in the nosebleed section holding a sign he'd made on a piece of poster board that said, "Congratulations, Dr. Naomi," in thick black marker. I wasn't a doctor yet. But Gerald had written it down, and sometimes that matters more than you'd think. Claire's DePaul graduation the year prior had a dinner reservation at Monteverde afterward. Tiffany bracelet, balloons. I want to ask you something right now, and I mean it sincerely. If you grew up in a family where one child was clearly the one, the chosen one, the one the room arranged itself around, I want you to tell me in the comments, were you that child? Or were you the other one? And did you know it while it was happening? Or did you only understand it when you were finally far enough away to look back? Because for years I thought I was imagining the asymmetry. I thought I was keeping score when I shouldn't have been. It took me a long time to understand that noticing an injustice is not the same thing as inventing one. Medical school at Rush University Medical College was 4 years of my life compressed into something that felt, at the time, less like education and more like a sustained test of whether I was willing to sacrifice every comfort to become the person I'd decided at 11 years old to become. I was willing. The answer was always yes. I graduated in the top 8% of my class with $228,000 in combined student loan debt. $47,000 from UIC and $181,000 from Rush. I want you to hold that number for a moment. $228,000. Not an abstraction. A number I saw on a screen every time I logged into my loan servicer portal, which I did monthly, because I needed to know exactly what I was carrying. I matched at Northwestern Memorial Hospital for my residency in cardiology. I called my mother from the match room with the envelope still in my hand. She said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Is Northwestern a good program?" Northwestern Memorial is a top 10 academic medical center in the United States, nationally ranked in cardiology and heart surgery. My mother had never had reason to know this, because she had never had reason to follow the path I was on. I said, "It's a very good program, Mom." She said, "That's great, honey. Claire's actually having a hard time with Mason's sleep schedule. She's exhausted." Mason was Claire's firstborn. He was 14 months old. I said I hoped things got easier with the sleep, and I hung up, and I stood in the hallway of the Rush Medical College match room with the Northwestern envelope in my hand, and I let myself feel, privately and without an audience, exactly how proud I was of myself. My residency years were not glamorous. They were not Instagram worthy. They were 84-hour weeks and call nights that bled into mornings and a 580 square foot studio apartment on North Fairfield in Logan Square that cost $1,050 a month and had a radiator that clanged like something living in it was trying to get out. I kept a color-coded call schedule on my refrigerator, 8 weeks visible at a time. I ate a lot of rice. I ate a lot of frozen edamame microwaved in the bag. I cried in the stairwell of Northwestern twice in my first month. Once because I'd been awake for 31 hours and a patient coded, and I froze for 3 seconds before the attending stepped in, and 3 seconds in a code is a long time. Once because it was November and I was 26 and I had not spoken to anyone outside the hospital in 9 days, and the stairwell was the only place you could cry without being seen. I called my mother both times. She answered once. The other time she texted back 4 hours later. Claire's going through it with Mason's school situation. Can I call you this weekend? The school situation was a preschool waitlist. I never texted back. What I had instead were 2 things that turned out to be sufficient. The first was Dr. Evelyn Park. Dr. Park is the chief of cardiology at Northwestern Memorial. She is 52 now. She was 44 when I arrived as a first-year resident, and she is the most technically precise human being I have ever been in a room with. She reads an echocardiogram the way other people read a novel, finding tension in the waveforms, narrative in the gradients. She noticed me in my second month. Not because she was kind, though she is kind, because she was watching, and she saw what I could do. She pulled me aside after I'd assisted on my first successful coronary stent. She said, "You have good hands, Dr. Calloway. Don't let anyone rush them." She was not talking about the procedure. I understood that. Over the next 5 years, Dr. Park became the person who wrote my fellowship recommendation and fought for my attending position, and told me, in a direct way that I had not experienced from anyone who shared my last name, that she expected a great deal from me because she believed I was capable of it. That is not a small thing. Being expected to be great is an act of profound respect. My parents had never expected anything from me specifically, because they had never paid enough attention to know what to expect. The second thing I had was Simone Okafor. Simone is a charge nurse in the cardiac unit, 32 now, from Houston, Loyola nursing graduate, married to a man named Darius, who sells commercial real estate in Fulton Market and makes very good chili. Simone is the person who showed up in the break room on the worst night of my residency with a container of jollof rice her mother had sent from Houston and sat with me without saying anything while I processed the loss of my first patient, a 59-year-old third-grade teacher from Evanston named Deborah Walsh, who died of a pulmonary embolism I hadn't caught in time. Simone didn't tell me it wasn't my fault. She didn't tell me I'd done everything I could. She just sat there until I was ready to go back. And she has been sitting there, metaphorically, in every hard thing since. I think about what it means that the 2 women who have most shaped my adult life are women I found inside the walls of a hospital, in a field my family had no interest in, building a version of myself they never saw coming. Now I need to tell you about the party. My father turned 60 on November 14th. I know this because I sent him a card, a real one, from a stationery shop on Milwaukee Avenue, heavy cream stock, a simple design. I wrote something in it that I meant, that I was proud of what he'd built in his career, that I hoped 60 felt like a beginning. I mailed it on November 10th and heard nothing back. This was not surprising. My father and I had been operating at a polite, careful distance for most of my adult life. Cards on birthdays, calls on Father's Day, a seat at the Thanksgiving table that I occupied without drama and left without ceremony. We were not close. We were not enemies. We were two people who shared a last name and very little else. On November 16th, my Aunt Carol posted 12 photos on Instagram. I need to tell you about this carefully because the sequence matters. I was not looking for evidence of anything. I was on my couch on a Sunday evening in my one-bedroom apartment on North Paulina in Wicker Park. I'd upgraded from Logan Square by then, $1,890 a month, which felt like a palace. And I was scrolling through my phone with a glass of red wine I'd poured and hadn't touched. My Aunt Carol's post came up in my feed. The caption said, "Celebrating Bobby. 60 years of this wonderful man. So blessed." There was a balloon arch, gold and navy. There was a 3-tier cake from Sweet Mandy B's on North Clark. There were 60 guests at round tables draped in white linen at a venue called Willow Creek Event Center on Route 59 in Naperville. There were toasts. There was my father at the head table with my mother and Claire and Derek, and Mason and Lily, who was 6 and wearing a white dress with gold ribbons in her hair. There was my Aunt Carol and my Aunt Diane and Uncle Phil, who had driven down from Rockford. There were my father's contractor friends and my parents' neighbors and Claire's in-laws, the Hartmans, who had come in from Barrington Hills. I was not in any of the 12 photographs. I scrolled through 3 times. I was not there because I had not been invited. I sat with my phone in my lap for a long time after that. The television was on. I could not tell you what was playing. The wine was room temperature by the time I put the phone down. My cousin Hannah texted me the next morning at 8:47. Hannah is my father's niece through Aunt Carol, and she is a genuinely decent person who had no idea she was delivering news when she wrote, "I assumed you couldn't make it because of work." Then I realized I never saw your name on the invite. "Naomi, were you not invited?" I typed back, "I wasn't." She called immediately. I sent it to voicemail. I needed 24 more hours before I could perform composure for anyone who loved me. Here is what I want to ask you right now, and I want you to sit with it before you answer. Have you ever found out you'd been erased from something? Not through a confrontation, not through a screaming match, but quietly, through a photograph you weren't supposed to see, a post you stumbled across, a caption that named everyone in the room except you? Have you ever felt the floor just drop out? Not because anything was said, but because the silence was so complete? Tell me in the comments, because I have never met a person who couldn't tell me exactly when that happened to them, and I want to know. I called my mother 3 days later. I gave myself 3 days because I wanted to be clear-eyed when I did it. I dialed her number on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table in my apartment with a cup of coffee in front of me that I'd made to give my hands something to do. She answered on the second ring and sounded cheerful, the way she always sounds when she picks up the phone, which is a thing I once found comforting and now recognize as a layer of performance that never drops. I said, "Mom, I saw the photos from Dad's party." 2 seconds of quiet, then, "Oh, Naomi, I thought you'd be working." "You didn't ask." "Well, you're always so busy." A pause. "We didn't want to bother you." 60 people were not bothered, I said. I would not have been a bother. It wasn't. We just thought it would be easier. And then she said, "Claire really planned the whole thing. It was really her event." Her event. My father's 60th birthday was my sister's event. I was not an oversight. I was an inconvenience to someone else's event. That is the sentence I have turned over in my mind more times than I can count. Not with anger exactly. Not anymore. But with the clean, cold clarity of someone who has finally been given the precise language for something she's been trying to name for 30 years. I said, "Okay, Mom." And I hung up. I didn't call back for Thanksgiving. I told them I was on call, which wasn't true. I worked Christmas by choice. Easy enough to arrange, because I was a good enough attending that my schedule requests were honored without question. I spent Thanksgiving at Simone and Darius's place in Pilsen with 7 other people who had nowhere they'd rather be, eating yams and watching football, and holding their 8-month-old daughter Zora on my shoulder while she slept. I spent Christmas Eve with Dr. Park and her husband Bernard and their 2 college-age sons at Maple and Ash in Gold Coast, eating dry-aged ribeye and drinking a Barolo and talking about everything and nothing. I was 33 years old, and I was not performing gratitude at a table where I was tolerated. There is something I want to ask you here, and I mean it as a real question. What was the moment, if you had one, that finally made you stop waiting for your family to choose you? Not the moment you stopped being angry, not the moment you forgave them, the moment you stopped waiting for the choosing, stopped checking the mailbox, stopped flinching every time the phone didn't ring. Was there a single thing? Or did it happen the way ice melts, gradually and then all at once? Tell me in the comments. I'm asking because I genuinely want to know, not because I have the answer figured out. For me, it was a Tuesday morning in January, 6 weeks after the party. I was running on the lakefront path near Fullerton, one of those January mornings in Chicago where the air feels like something physical pressing against your face, and the lake is the color of a bruise. I'd been running for 40 minutes, and I realized I hadn't thought about my parents in 4 days. Not with anger, not with longing, not at all. Like a light that had been dimmed so slowly you only notice when it's gone. I stopped on the path. The cold came off the lake in straight lines. I thought, this is what peace actually feels like. I was 2 months away from the worst call of my career. On February 8th, I was the attending cardiologist on call in Northwestern's cardiac unit. It was a Tuesday. I had been on since 7 that morning. At 6:42 in the evening, my pager went off at the workstation outside room 412, where I was reviewing an echocardiogram that had been flagged for mild aortic regurgitation. STEMI, male, 60 years, ETA 4 minutes, Naperville Fire Station 3. I didn't think anything. I moved to the scrub sink. I pulled gloves. I walked to the bay. The paramedic came through the double doors at 6:46 with the tablet raised, reading the relay. Robert Calloway, 60 years. Acute chest pain onset approximately 40 minutes ago during recreational golf at White Eagle Golf Club in Aurora. EMS on scene in 8 minutes. Field strip showing clear ST elevation, V2 through V5. I heard the name. I looked at the face. My father was gray at the edges, that particular ash-gray color that happens when the heart is not moving enough blood to where it needs to go. His eyes were open. The pain was visible in every muscle of his face. And then he saw me, and the pain became something else, something added on top of it. That same shock, that unsteady expression, the name coming out before the thought. Naomi. Mr. Calloway. I moved to the head of the gurney. You're at Northwestern Memorial. Your heart is working harder than it should right now, and we're going to fix that. I need you to stay still and let us work. He didn't say anything else. I don't know what he would have said if there had been time. There wasn't. We had him in the cath lab at 6:52. The interventional team was already scrubbed. I was running the case. Door to balloon time, the interval between the patient arriving at the hospital and the moment the blocked artery is opened, is the metric that determines outcomes in a STEMI. Best outcomes are under 90 minutes. Nationally, the average is about 65. Ours that night was 31. The blockage was in the left anterior descending artery. The LAD cardiologists sometimes call it the widowmaker because of what it does to the muscle downstream when it closes. My father's LAD had an 85% occlusion at the mid-vessel. We placed a bare metal stent. I watched the ST elevation resolve on the monitor. I watched the color return to his waveforms. I watched his blood pressure stabilize at 116/72 and hold there. He was going to live. When we moved him to the recovery bay and he was awake and oriented and his rhythm was normal sinus, I went back to the nurse's station and stood at the workstation and stared at the monitor for a moment before I did anything else. Simone was there. She looked at me the way only someone who knows your whole story looks at you. She didn't say a word. She handed me a cup of Northwestern Memorial break room coffee, which is objectively terrible. Bitter and over-extracted and served in a paper cup that collapses if you hold it too hard. And I took it and drank it, and we stood there in the fluorescent quiet for 30 seconds. "Your family?" she said. "My father," I said. "He's stable." "You okay?" I thought about it honestly for a moment. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah." My mother arrived at 8:15. She came through the waiting room doors with her coat still buttoned and her face the color of old paper. Claire and Derek arrived at 8:40 from Naperville, Derek in a fleece vest, Claire with a look on her face I had never seen before, stripped down, the social fluency she usually carries herself with completely gone. They saw me in the hallway before they saw anything else. My mother stopped walking. She said my name. I said, "He's stable. LAD stent. Door to balloon was 31 minutes. Ejection fraction is preserved at 54%. He'll spend 2 nights in the cardiac unit for monitoring. Then he can go home on dual antiplatelet therapy. I've arranged follow-up with Dr. Anand Kapoor at Edward Elmhurst Health in Naperville. He's the best outpatient interventional cardiologist in the western suburbs. I'll have the discharge paperwork ready by tomorrow morning." My mother started to cry. Not quietly. The way a body cries when it has been bracing for the worst thing for 2 hours and the worst thing didn't happen. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, and I let her. I put my arms around my mother in a hospital hallway, and I held her. And I felt 2 things at the same time, and I want to be honest, that both of them were real. One was genuine relief that my father had survived. Clean, uncomplicated, human relief. The other was a completely separate and unmoved awareness that none of this changed the architecture of what had happened between us. Those 2 things can exist simultaneously. That is something I have learned. You can be glad someone is alive and still be clear-eyed about who they are to you. Claire said, very quietly, "Naomi, you were his doctor." I said, "I was." She started to say something else and stopped. Whatever she was going to say, she put it away. Claire has never been directly unkind to me. She is not my villain. In that hallway, lit by the flat overhead light of a cardiac unit at 9 in the evening, she looked ashamed. Not performed shame. Real shame. The kind that sits behind the eyes and doesn't know what to do with itself. I said, "You can go in. Keep it brief." And I walked back to the nurse's station. My father was discharged on February 10th. I supervised the discharge personally. I caught a potential interaction between his new blood thinner and an over-the-counter fish oil supplement he'd been taking without telling anyone. I arranged the follow-up. I printed the dietary guidelines and the cardiac rehab referral and the emergency contact sheet for his wife. I went in to see him before he left. It was the only time we were alone. He was sitting up in the hospital bed in his own clothes. Green flannel shirt, khakis. Looking more like himself, and less like the gray figure on the gurney 2 days earlier. The morning light came through the window at an angle. On the rolling tray table was a get well card with a hand-drawn sun on it, the G in get written backward, which meant Mason had made it, which meant it had been there since the previous afternoon. I noted that and didn't say anything about it. My father looked at me for a long time. "I didn't know you were here," he said finally, "at this hospital." "I've been here 7 years," I said. He nodded. He looked at his hands. "Your mother and I—" He stopped. Looked up. "We should have told you about the party." "Yeah," I said. "I'm not good at—" He stopped again. "I know," I said. I was not trying to hurt him. I want to be clear about that. I was being accurate. My father is a man who can walk a job site and identify every load-bearing failure in a structure, but who has never once in my memory said, "I'm sorry" to either of his daughters, and meant it as a complete sentence. He trails off. He gestures at the space where the apology should be and expects the other person to fill it in. I have spent 34 years filling in that space. I didn't fill it in that morning. "Thank you," he said. He gestured vaguely at himself, at the room, at whatever was now inside his artery that hadn't been there 3 days earlier. "That's my job," I said. And I told him to take his Plavix every single day without exception. I told him to cut the sodium and walk 30 minutes a day starting this week. I told him to call Dr. Kapoor's office if he felt any tightness, any shortness of breath, anything that didn't feel right. I told him the paramedics from Naperville Fire Station 3 had done an excellent job, and he should write them a letter. Then I left the room. My mother called me 4 times in the months that followed. The first call was to tell me my father was recovering well, and that they thought perhaps we should all get together soon. I said maybe, meaning, I don't know. The second was to tell me Claire was pregnant again, her third. And would I come to the baby shower in April? I said I'd check my schedule, which was the civil version of probably not. And the third call I let go to voicemail. She said she just wanted to hear my voice. The fourth call came on a Thursday evening in May, and it was different. When I answered, my mother didn't sound cheerful. She sounded smaller. She said, "Naomi, I've been thinking about things." I sat down. "Okay," I said. "I think we got it wrong." She was fumbling, which was so unlike her that I noticed it immediately. I'm not saying we didn't love you. I'm saying we told ourselves you were fine because you always seemed fine, and I think what that really meant was that we let you be fine on your own while we paid attention to everything else. I said, "I was fine. I made myself fine." "I know," she said. "Naomi, that's what I mean." I listened to her for 20 minutes. I didn't interrupt, and I let her say what she'd been working up to saying, and I want to respect the privacy of what she said because some of it is hers to hold. But at the end, I told her the truest thing I knew how to say. I said, "Mom, I'm not waiting to be angry. I'm genuinely not angry right now. I have a full life. I have people who see me clearly and work that matters, and I'm okay. But I need you to understand that loving you doesn't mean I need you to be different than you are. And it also doesn't mean I'm going to keep adjusting myself to fit a space that was never built for me. If you want a real relationship, I want one too, but it has to be on equal terms." She said, "What does that look like?" I said, "You ask about my life without pivoting to Claire's in the first 4 minutes. You say my name at family gatherings the same way you say hers. You show up for me the way you've always shown up for her." There was a long pause. Then she said, "Okay. We talk now about once every 3 weeks. It is tentative and deliberate, and sometimes stilted, like two people learning each other's language from scratch in middle age. It is not the relationship I would have written. It is not warm the way Simone is warm or steady the way Dr. Park is steady. But it is real, and I have learned to value real things even when they're incomplete. My father and I communicate through medical updates and the occasional text. He sent one in March. "Dr. Kapoor says everything's looking good." I texted back, "Great. Stay on the Plavix. That is the current architecture of our relationship, and I have stopped spending energy wanting it to be something it isn't." Claire texted me in March, and she said, "I don't know what the right words are, and I've been sitting with this since February. I just want you to say that I see it now. The unfairness. I don't have an excuse. I just see it." I held that text for 2 days before I answered. Then I said, "I believe you. I don't need anything from you, Claire. Just be aware." when your own kids are older. Make sure they both know they're equally wanted. Make sure neither one of them ever has to make themselves fine on their own while you're paying attention somewhere else. She said, I'm trying. I said, that's enough. It doesn't restore a childhood. It doesn't put my name back on a guest list for a party that has already happened. It doesn't return the graduations or the car with the red bow or the 4 years of college that someone else paid for without being asked. But it is someone looking directly at the structure and naming what they see. And I have learned over 34 years that being named and being seen are not nothing. They are, in fact, quite a lot. I'm sitting in my apartment right now. It's a Thursday evening in October, and the light through my west-facing windows is doing the thing it does in Chicago in fall. That amber that makes the city look like a painting of itself, like someone turned the saturation up just slightly before sunset. I have a glass of red wine. I have my running shoes by the door. I have my diplomas in the second bedroom, which I use as a study. University of Illinois at Chicago, Rush Medical College, Northwestern Memorial Department of Medicine, framed in level on the wall. I have $91,000 left on my student loans, down from $228,000. I am going to be clear of them by the time I'm 37, at the pace I'm going. I think about Deborah Walsh sometimes, the patient I lost in my second year of residency, the 59-year-old teacher from Evanston. I think about what she needed that I didn't have the skill to give her yet, and I carry that case into every difficult patient encounter I face. The dead are instructive, if you're honest enough to learn from them. I am trying to be honest enough. I think about my father on the gurney, the way his eyes found mine before anything else, the particular, unguarded expression on his face, not the pain from the infarct, not the fear, but the shock of being seen by me specifically, in that context, in that corridor. I replay it not as revenge, not as score settling. I replay it as information about what I became while no one was paying attention, and as evidence that the work was real. A few weeks after he was discharged, Simone and I went for a walk along the lakefront near North Avenue Beach. February, so the water was the color of hammered pewter and the wind came off the lake in flat, unbroken lines. We were talking about nothing specific, and then Simone said, "How do you actually feel about everything? Honestly." I thought about it for a minute. Really thought about it. The way you think about a question when the person asking it will know if you give them the easy answer. "I feel like myself," I said. Simone nodded. She didn't say anything else. That's the thing about the people who truly see you. They don't need the narrative explained. They were there for most of the middle, and they already know how the story goes. I am 34 years old. I am a cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. I have $91,000 left on my student loans. I have a life that is dense with meaning and full of people who found me and chose me and keep choosing me. And I saved my father's life on a Tuesday evening in February, not because I'd forgiven him, not because I needed him to finally see me, but because he was a patient with an occluded LAD, and I am the best cardiologist in that unit on a Tuesday night. That is the most honest thing I know how to tell you. If you were standing in that corridor, gloves on, pager going off, looking up, and seeing the face of the person who didn't invite you to their own birthday, what would you have done? I want to know. Leave it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, check the description.